Hello and thank you for joining me crafting on our Baltic Heritage cruise. Here you see me set up at one of the small tables in the lounge on the cruise ship with my wood mount box and some matte layers and some blank cards I prepped before we left for holiday. Now, Paper Pumpkin has been available in America, but it was the first time that we'd had it here in the UK. Now you can see here that I had packed one of our empty stamp cases and put some note cards in there from the kit, and I also took some extra pack of note cards with me. Now the board you see me leaning on, a very small kit to pack with, the board you see me leaning on was actually from the backing card that came in the kit. You'll see in the background I've got the 5 ink pads that complemented the accessories within the kit. So I've creased the card, one of the blank cards, and I've also got out of my wooden case, I took some pieces ready cut to size to save me taking a trimmer with me. So I have here a smaller piece of card, and this was a stamp set that was enclosed within the Paper Pumpkin kit, and I have taken the feather from that kit and mounted on one of the acrylic blocks. Here I was using the soft suede ink pad and was going to stamp all over with 3 different images just to fussy cut out with scissors a little later on to finish my card. So I literally took 1 block and 5 ink pads. And you see I was working on a very small table. These are kind of like cocktail tables within the a relaxing lounge area of the ship. And there's my 4 feathers, just a bit bright there on the camera, but 4 of the feathers that I stamped, and set those aside to let them dry. Next I took some of the tissue paper that the beautifully wrapped contents came in. Now I pre-cut a couple of pieces before I set the video running. Now this is a tissue paper technique that gives like a faux silk technique, and there's one side that's shiny and one side that's dull. I like to stamp on the dull side. So again I picked up the soft suede ink pad and stamped some feathers randomly. Now when working with tissue paper, the ink might bleed through, so you're best to lean on something. Plus it was quite a posh marble top table, very shiny, so I wanted to stop the glare, so that piece of cardboard came in handy from the backing paper. So just stamping those randomly all over the tissue paper, and then that will be set aside and you would need to dry, allow that to dry. So don't be afraid to go off the edges like I'm doing here, because that just fills all the areas. If it's just in the centre bit, it looks a little bit false. You want to complete the whole area. Now that's a finished piece for that card. And here I am just finishing off that second sheet of tissue paper, stamped all over just randomly and off the sides, and putting that aside to dry. For this technique it does need to dry fully. Here I was just retrieving a blender pen and my aqua painter. Now there's enough, these inks are water based, and there is enough ink on that stamp just to pull it in from the ink into the colour, into the centre, so that it fills that stub base, just as I'm showing you here. Just a plain water brush has pulled that in. That's all 4 of them done now. Okay, and you can see the heavier stamps, the more detailed areas remain that little bit darker. Next I picked up the tissue paper again. By now obviously we've allowed it to dry, and I've scrumpled it up into a little tight ball. You want to have lots of creases on this piece of tissue paper, and then I usually have the ink facing inwards, and then you're going to unroll it, but don't smooth it out detailed, just leave all those creased lines in there, and take a smaller piece of card that you're going to use as your topper. It needs to be slightly bigger than what you want to use it for, and then this is one of the only techniques I use the fat end of the Tombow for, and I literally covered the entire piece of cardstock with the Tombow. Squeeze a little bit out and just get it runny, and then cover and I went both ways, up and down and side to side. You want every little tiny piece covered with that adhesive. Okay, it's just being quite thorough just to get every single little bit. If you get little air bubbles and little pieces that have missed, obviously it won't take. Okay, and once that's done, we take the piece of tissue paper and we lay it, just place it onto that piece of cardstock, the gluey cardstock. So just going to place it on and then gently tap it with your fingers. We don't want to smooth out these creases, we just want to make sure that every tiny little piece has caught onto that paper. So it's quite a delicate little operation, but it's worth the effort to actually get that done. And you can see if the ink had been wet, the ink would have gone on to other pieces of the tissue paper and it would have looked a bit grotty. So it's nearly done. And just bringing that up to the camera just to show you how the creases, you can see the creases in there, which is how silk would look. So again, that needs to dry thoroughly. I quickly paused the video while I made up the second piece of the tissue paper, and here I have my wood mount case with the matte layers in all the colours that the ink pads that I brought with me. Here's a soft suede layer that's just going to be a matte layer on this card, adding some Tombow on the reverse and attaching to the centre of that card. This has been sped up again just to save time, and there is the matte layer ready to go. So next I have a couple of pieces that I pre-cut, die cut and punched before my trip, and just going to stamp one of the sentiments from the stamp set in the Paper Pumpkin kit using the early espresso ink and stamped onto the soft suede. So there's the sentiment stamped. So I'm going to remove that stamp off the block and replace it with the speckles, the dots, and going to stamp around the edge of that sentiment, just stamping that off on the board just to give it a second generation so it's slightly lighter, to take the edge off the plainness. So once I've gone all the way around the edge of that, I will show that to the camera. One more bit on the end. You can see that just to add some attention to detail on there. So next we take the Stampin' Dimensionals, the foam pads, and just mat and layer those together. Pop a couple of the dimensions on the back. I can't craft without my tweezers, so they have to travel with me. They're handy not only for just getting them off the packet, but also for just lifting off the backs of those, as you can see I'm doing there. Okay, they can go in my little rubbish bag, so I kept the area I was working in tidy, and placed that on the stitched nested shape, and then that's ready to mount later. The reason I'm just pausing slightly there is because I need to allow for that adhesive to fully dry on that tissue paper before we do the next step. So I've just finished decorating that. I've taken a couple of pearls, again with my tweezers, just picking those up and placing those randomly on the sentiment, on the topper. Our adhesive gems are brilliant, the rhinestones and the pearls. I just felt the pearls went with this set better, so I just put 3 little pearls in a little stack to the side. So it's ready to go on our card when we finish it. And then I also had some twine that came in the actual kit, so I just chose which colour I wanted to use on this card, and just to tie a little bow. Turn the mat over to keep it clean, because when you're crafting like this you can have a messy side and a clean side. So here I'm doing my little bunny ears. So in my right hand I've got a loop, and my left hand I've got a loop. Then I've just slipped them over, wrapped them over in the centre and pulled them tight to create a bow. Okay, then just using my snips, just cut off the tails there to a sensible length. Now I'll attach this just later on when I finish the whole card. So now I'm bringing back my piece of tissue paper, and normally I would use a guillotine to actually chop these layers off. However, I didn't bring one on the cruise ship with us. So I had a very old tool that Stampin' Up used to have. Some of you might recognise it. There's various tools on a keyring here. One is a distressor, one is for scoring, one is for perforating, but one is for cutting. So you'll see that's got a nice little self-contained blade in there. And I did bring a ruler with me. So the importance here is with no grid paper to keep it square. This is only a plastic ruler. If possible, you want to use this with a metal ruler, but because there's a plastic edge to the blade, it's not cutting directly. So I literally just ran that along the ruler. You do have to just press a little bit harder. I was just a bit wary of doing too deep onto the table. So just cut that and smooth those edges. And then go all the way around doing exactly the same thing. Once you've got rid of the scruffy edges, as I call them, you can then measure up to your card and then make the sides smaller if you need to. Okay, so we've finished cutting all of those pieces now. I'm just going to hold that up to the card and just see how that fits. Make sure we're happy with it, which that looks lovely. So we're just going to turn that over and apply some more Tombow to the back of that layer and attach that. Again, just speeding this piece of video up, just sticking the topper onto the base card and the matte layer and pressing that down firmly. Make sure there's no glue squeezing out the sides. And then we'll put the topper on there in place. We've already put a matte layer, so we're just going to put some Tombow and put that matte flat onto the base card. So next we're going to reach out and take our feathers that we stamped and watercoloured earlier, and we're going to have 2 for each card. So these just need to be fussy cut. There's no die for these, anything in the paper pumpkin kit. So I'm just literally fussy cutting that with my snips. So now I've finished cutting the last feather, and again speeded up. I'm just applying Stampin' Dimensionals, the mini ones, to the back of the feathers, and just going to position those to the left hand side of the sentiment and overlapping them slightly. So once those pieces of backing have been removed, just a little bit of Tombow at the bottom there, and again with the tweezers just place one in place first of all slightly to the right, and then the other one slightly to the left, so they crisscross a little bit. Then the bow that we had earlier, just a tiny little bit of Tombow on there, slightly too much, so I just dab off the excess and then hold that bow down with my tweezers, the back of my tweezers, just until a few seconds until the Tombow has set. And I've trimmed the ends off there, and there we're finished. So thanks again for joining us today, my first recorded video of crafting on the cruise ship, and we were on the Sapphire Princess cruising to the Baltic Heritage in June 2019.